This is the Venerable Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a seminar entitled The Practice of Meditation on the Bodhisattva Path, held at the San Francisco Dharma Dhatu in San Francisco, California. This will be talk number 1, held June 9th, 1972.
This is a CTI custom remaster made January 2024.
Idea of Buddha nature. The idea of Buddha nature has the more likely what we call a tendency, rather than actually full blossom of Buddha life. Richness and energy. And the reason why it is because it had to be acknowledged by the other. There seems to be the need for the path. In other words, we could say that if we are already enlightened, then there's no need for the path as such. The reason why the requirements of the path become necessary is to bring it to its level of energizing the Buddha nature. So whatever the commitment or practices involved in the past, it could be said as a way of energizing the Buddha nature. Of course, we could say the nature of the path as such is not particularly pleasurable or, for that matter, particularly exciting, because the nature of the path is largely relating with the familiarity of the surroundings and seeing the extraordinary qualities into the familiarity surroundings, that emotions, relationships, communication, ups and downs of all kinds of psychological neurosis processes that we tend to go through, which are not necessarily extraordinary to us. It's always bothersome. But at the same time, that we would like to get beyond this repetitious chain reactions. We try to get beyond that. Instead of getting beyond it, when we begin to acknowledge the other and begin to enter into the past, we begin to intensify that repetition, in fact. That sense of intensification is not regarded as actual intensification as such at all, but it is because we begin to acknowledge, begin to see it first time. So it is seemingly intensified. Like if you start studying art and you begin to paint pictures under master, we begin to discover how unartistic we are. That doesn't mean to say that you grasp your appreciation to the art, but because we begin to realize what we have, or what's the situation that involved us, that kind of acknowledging or seeing the existing neurosis in us clearly. So seemingly, with your wishful thinking of trotting on the path is somewhat cure. Instead, being cure, before it cures, it sort of intensifies the problem. In order to cure, you have to find the problem. So finding problems seems to be bothersome, therefore we feel that we are going to regress the past. And that's, according to the what's known as the 5 paths. The first path is the path of accumulation. And second path is the path of unification. So the first path of accumulation is that of things got worse. Seemingly things got worse. Is the first path of accumulation. Which is in the ordinary level. Not at all in the Bodhisattva level, but it's a layman's level from their point of view. And the second path of unification, or Jorlam in Tibetan, which is bringing together, patching together, matching together, gluing together, which is the second path in which the intensification is there, but willing to struggle with it, with intensification. Somewhat one tends to realize the reason why intensification has occurred, and therefore one might say, well, I have to put up with it, and I'm just waiting something will happen. Of course, the sense of something will happen is there, and still the background of the path is a mystery for us from that point of view, from the layman's point of view. But we are willing to struggle, willing to push through, willing to plow through. That's like a marriage that you have to got to stick with this person. Whether your previous first choice was good or bad, whatever, but in conventional speaking, that we have to stick with this person because we got married to this person. Try to live through it. I mean, that's also somewhat depressing, but nevertheless it is extraordinarily creative. It's very creative. That point, the sense of a warrior, of the Bodhisattva's tendency is beginning to pick up. In other words, path is not regarding from that point of view as a pleasurable situation. And somewhat we begin to feel the whole sense of application on the path. Somewhat we begin to feel it. We begin to realize that there is something that we have to put up with, something that we have to live with. Almost on the verge of giving up hope. But then one begins to realize giving up hope is a cop-out. So, somewhat that one tend to hover between the two situations, either giving up hope or regarding the hope, or the hopelessness of the hope is somewhat a starting point. That's the path of accumulation, path of, unification. And we could say at that point that we have actually managed to get into the path. The constant struggle is regarded as source of learning situation. Then we have the next situation, which is the path of perception or path of insight. Tonglam. Path of insight. And the path of insight is the beginning of the Bodhisattva's journey. Bodhisattva's experience, where we begin to develop what's called the first bhumi of the Bodhisattva's level, spiritual level of Bodhisattvahood. The Bodhisattva's level of spiritual development is referred to as bhumi in Sanskrit, or sa in Tibetan, which means, basically means earth. Or ground in some sense. So in other words, the 10 stages of Bodhisattva's path could be regarded as way of grounding constantly, way of able to relate with the earth. When there's more or further sense of earthiness, solidness, or for that matter we could call it basic sanity. So that solidness and absolutely being sane and absolutely being somewhat realistic to regard to oneself and life situation around one. And that kind of literal way of looking at situations is the bhumi, Bodhisattva's definition of bhumi, of grounding process. So, if we have to go through 10 stages of grounding process before attainment of Buddhahood, then that first one must be rather shaky. But nevertheless, by sense of comparative to the layman's stages of the human way of path for unification, it is extraordinary saying. Because we tend to develop, the first bhumi stage, we tend to develop sudden discoveries of richness. After then, we might try to live with the path and try to struggle along. We feel that we are wretched and poor and worthless somewhat. We associate it with ourselves as lowest of the lowest in some sense. Spiritually, psychologically, fucked up. We don't know anything about it. If you know anything about it, that's confusion. But somewhat at that point, we begin to pick up that after all, that constant living with confusion, after all, isn't all that bad. And I contain tremendous richness. I could be generous, in fact. I don't have to collect anymore any further. And realize that you don't have to beg the richness from others, but realize that you contain hidden treasure. As the analogies of this, or the notion of a bodhisattva, the notion of Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha nature, is described in the scriptures as poor men find gold, hidden treasure, underneath his hut. Up to that point that he's been going out for wealth. But when he realized that there is a treasure underneath his property, underneath his hut, that he began to dig up. And he began to develop a sense of richness from that point of view. Or another analogy is that of commoner giving birth to a universal monarch. Suddenly you begin to realize your son is going to be a universal monarch. All kinds of analogies be used for this particular notion of sudden discovery of richness. That realize that you don't have to be poverty-stricken anymore at all. Of course, which is a pure attitude or how you view the whole situation. And that again doesn't mean that you'll be given a new message or new ideas. And therefore, those words of wisdom that you attain are notion of richness. So nothing to do with outsiders from that point of view, but it is something that within us. That struggle becomes meaningful. The living with pettiness or living with chaos and living with depression and all these things contain tremendous wealth in them. The first positive step is therefore generosity. Is the first bhumi, and the term for the first bhumi is used raptugava, which means exceeding joy. Bodhisattva, when he taught on the first path, he developed exceeding joy, complete joy, discovering that he could give instead of begging. And that generosity, again, of course, is voluntary generosity. Sometimes people say that generosity without expectation, not expecting that you're going to get something in return, but you just give because you can afford to give. The sense of poverty contains tremendous aggression, tightness, constant defensive, constantly being defensive, constant holding back, not willing to reveal, seemingly your fault, but at the same time not willing to reveal the goodness either. So birth becomes the same sort of thing. So from that point of view of generosity, it is something more than generosity actually. It's a sense of absence of aggression, where the Bodhisattva begin to see the real meaning of Dharma for the first time. The definition of a Dharma is passionlessness. And the passion, in this case, is hatred or aggression, speed, the competitiveness. And I suppose we could say that's the real definition of word peace from that sense, from the point of view of Buddhism. Peace is not so much a peacefulness, but it is simply absence of aggression. So, generosity develops in the Bodhisattva's path at the beginning. It is that of discovering of the real meaning of Dharma and the real meaning of peace, and the real meaning of freedom, liberation. That you don't have to give in order to get something back, but you can just give and give without expectation. And also, moreover, that particular stage of Bodhisattva, development of first bhumi, also could be said that the starting point of compassion. And the fundamental point of compassion is communication. The sense of communication is generous one. We're willing to accommodate others unconditionally. Well, we could talk more about compassion. It becomes a prominent topic further on this evening and tomorrow's talks. So, what I would like to make clear in this point is the transition from a layman's path of struggle unto the Bodhisattva's sense of joy, exceeding joy, and richness is not a question of collecting something or giving. You have received new things, new ideas, or new help from outsiders, but simply a product of giving up hope in some sense. So from that sense, hopelessness is the starting point of Bodhisattva's path. It sounds very negative when we say hopelessness is Bodhisattva's path, but you can only express the positivity by making emphasis on the negatives. So hopelessness of trying to live with current upheaval brings a sense of richness, a sense of compassion, a sense of wealth, discover a sudden wealth in you. Seems to be the basic point that I would like to get across to. And that seems to be a very important introduction to Bodhisattva or transition to Bodhisattva path. We could have discussions on that.
The point of giving is you have unlimited wealth to give and to give and to give. That sort of infers a giving because you know that the pot is always full. If you would be in the same position and knowing that the pot had a limit on it, is that a difference that you wouldn't be in that position to keep on giving?
Well, you see, that's the point. You begin to discover that it is already full a long time ago. It's not only full, but it's a bottomless pot. It has inexhaustible resources. And that discovery of plentifulness can only develop by seeing the poverty of the struggle, of aggression. When aggression is lived with, or the poverty is lived with and worked with, dealt completely as a working basis, then we begin to clear out some layers of hesitations. In other words, the hesitation brings the richness, in some sense.
What are the three lords of materialism? I read it, we said it in this thing this morning, and it sounds as if that's what we were dealing with as a bodhisattva. And I didn't know what was meant by the three lords of materialism.
Well, materialism in this context is referred to more of psychological materialism in the sense of business-like mentality, competitiveness, which is the heart of the whole thing. when you say you're a materialistic person, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a lot of things around you, material things around you. Everybody has to have some things around them. But it's the attitude of materialistic approach, of competitiveness and business-like mentality, which means also a sense of how much is worth for me if I do this. Everything's bargained, everything's evaluated highly. It's psychological materialism. So psychological materialism falls into three different parts. One can make all kinds of hypothetical things, but basically prominent seem to be three types. The first one seem to be purely searching for pleasure in the very simple-minded sense, and real business-like mentality of more accumulation of wealth brings me happiness and security. The richer I am, the more happy I will be. It's a very primitive one. And the second type is using that notion in terms of discovery of philosophy and study of economy or whatever. They're trying to impose that idea that the more you collect, that the more you become richer. So philosophically, spiritually, if you learn more, the more happiness you get. So in other words, regarding the attainment of enlightenment is that successful businessman who manages to collect more, so therefore he becomes a smart person. Yeah, the whole thing on those terms. And then the third one is what's known as spiritual materialism, having rationalized, having philosophically worked out these principles. And then spiritually, as terms of practice, we tend to do that as well. And if I sit and meditate, how much calmness I get out of sitting one session by volume. And that kind of, now I've been studying for 3 years, so I got something I didn't get anything. Yeah, so the credential or whatever, I mean, that's the whole point. If you get a credential, then at least you can relate with abstractly. Whereas if the practice doesn't need or does not evolve that mentality of giving credentials, then it becomes too abstract or too difficult to relate with the business-like way. And the spiritual practice is therefore geared to enrich your ego. So in other words, the three laws of materialism, all of those approaches are related with the ego. But different subtleties. The first one is a very simple-minded approach. Yeah, it's in the Buddhist tradition it is referred as body, speech and mind, which is the form and emotions and consciousness level. Three laws of materialism, which seem to play a very important part. In our lives. So that's the first thing that worthwhile knowing the functions of materialism.
In the practical application, say in a given situation you feel like you can give and give and give, and then you find yourself resenting that you're not getting something back. And that's happened to me where I thought I could do it, and I feel like I'm doing it, suddenly I'm not anymore. What can I do?
You're not one.
I'm not able to give anymore. I'm thinking I can, and I'm giving, and then suddenly, or I'm doing it, and then all of a sudden I'm not, and I'm resenting that I'm not getting something back. Then I start out with generosity, and then I'm not.
Oh, I see. Yeah. What's at what point that hesitation began to develop? Can you, in what particular situation or what point?
Well, I think it must have something to do with an expectation, maybe underneath, so that maybe in a way it's. I mean, I'm wondering if I'm deluding myself, even originally thinking I'm being capable of being generous. I mean, at the time I think I am being it, as far as I know, and then suddenly I'm not, and say with another person, feeling that I can give and then not getting something back. Not getting. Then I don't know what to do with myself. I mean, what can I do about this?
Well, I mean, you see, it's not a question of that you think you can give, therefore you give. Exactly. Maybe I didn't make it quite clear. The point is that you know that you can give, that you know that you. In fact, you don't bother to check whether, if you give too much, whether you're going to be end up by having nothing. Yeah. Well, that sounds like that you're watching yourself giving. There is a sort of faint self-congratulatory. Or if I may say faint. It's a kind of watching that what's happening. And like somebody's writing down your report, that how much you gave. And end of the day or the end of the year, you can get whatever. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say this is particularly problematic as such. And I mean, I would say that's a very good attempt at the beginning. That wouldn't become particularly problematic. Somehow the watching what you are doing and realize that you are able to be generous is like for the first time you can do that. You can be generous, and there's a sense of novelty involved, that you can be generous, and it feels somewhat good. Like suddenly if you become rich. It's kind of has the kind of honeymoon quality. But that wouldn't be regarded as particularly destructive or negative. And we all have to go through that process of having been able to open. Feels good. And we say it to ourselves or to others. Feels good. I mean, which is obviously the language or the voice of poverty, but nevertheless, that we used to be so poor, so even though we are rich, we can't not help speaking like poverty stricken. But I wouldn't say that's particularly problematic. And I wouldn't try to solve the problem as such, but I will go on giving. I mean, on one session you might get pushed back by the rate that you can't give. But the next attempt you may be able to give further, a little bit more. And then your giving process goes on and on. Well, there's no promise of anything. What do you say? I suppose we are giving, because they love, compassion, which means that providing the situation that the other people could communicate to you. It's kind of invitation, or sort of being host. And moreover, we are giving way the hesitation of the ego, of holding back. I mean, give in this case, it doesn't have to be you have to give word of wisdom to somebody, or do something clever, or something wise, or something like in terms of giving, in the ordinary sense of materialistic exchange as such, true. But it's the availabilities of the person and openness of the person is a tremendous gift to others. In fact, most highest gift of all. In fact, a lot of people seem to suffer from that, particularly if you're rich. That expressing your love to your children is to give them material goods until they're tired of it. Even they get tired of you as well. And then there's nothing more to give. That's the expression of poverty in some sense.
I'm trying to expand on the sense of hope and hopelessness. In hope, I see sort of, I'm trying to get a response from the expansion on the term. In hope, I sort of see sort of like a perpetuation of the other, of ego, of illusion, of illusion of love or happiness or something like that. In the expansion of hopelessness, I sort of feel dissolution or moving towards open space or nothing, and perhaps more fear and less faith. That's the
Did you say the hopelessness is? Did you say the hopelessness is?
Hopelessness just perpetuates more fear.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as you get closer to the more fear, you have less faith. It's harder.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds like the that you just made acquaintance with hopelessness. At that point, there is obviously a lot of fear because instead of if you made a relationship with something pleasurable, you feel the self-consciousness of the pleasurable situations. But at some stage, when you really give up hope, even fear doesn't fly, it's sort of total down. I mean, fear is somewhat revolutionary from that point of view. It's trying to poke one's head through. Yeah, but ultimate hopelessness is all pervasive. Which is seems to be necessary. I mean, it's prerequisite for the joy.
How do you understand shyness?
Well, again, there's a kind of sense of exposing one's private parts, and too much evaluation is based on doing the right thing, and realizing that possibilities of not doing the right thing, then it's sort of hesitation on the basis of that you expect certain credentials, congratulatory things in terms of yourself, which means the other, the ego. Constantly seek for credentials. And the shyness seems to be somewhat trying to manipulate the situation so that you don't go too far, so that you can step back safely, and then you can present it softly and smoothly. That kind of situation is also basically seems to be want to make it depends on the attitude is dependent on impression becomes more important. Making impressions on others become more important because that confirms your existence is good.
Some of these questions and also some of the things you started out saying reminded me of something I read in that translation of the Mahabharata text in Mudra, where he says, whatever you do, don't fall into the habit of analyzing your experiences. And yet that seems to be part and parcel of the Buddhist tradition. When we have 10 stages of the Bodhisattva and all of that, it sounds like a very systematic analysis of experience. So what I have nonetheless found that there are situations where it's not really worthwhile to analyze certain kinds of really neurotic experiences, that it's just another manifestation of neurosis to get picking around it. So if we trudge along the path with these neurotic problems, are there any guidelines that you can suggest where it's best to stay out and others where it's best to get in?
Well, the sense of analyzing oneself is quite different from that of prajna, transcendental knowledge. The difference is that transcendental knowledge, prajna, cuts through seemingly pleasant idea or seemingly hesitating idea or whatever, hesitating situations or inviting situations, whatever, cuts through all of those hesitations, all those hang-ups, so to speak. In the case of a general idea of analysis or analytical approach that we involve, which is common to both, of course, in the West as well as in the East, that there's overemphasized notion of logic and practices of sharpening yourself, which is trying to fit. Usually you can't have an analytical approach in the ordinary thinking, in the conventional sense, unless you have your own categories set up well in advance. And then having those categories set up, then you can analyze. Otherwise you feel you are incompetent to analyze anything. So the idea is, of prajna point of view, is that you don't have to have pigeonholes. You don't have to have categories, but analyze as it is, like chopping.
Well, this is why it almost, I had a moment of hesitation when you began to speak, as I began feeling that here are these pigeonholes of experiences. We have the unification pigeonhole where everyone goes through these various processes, and then we have the first bhumi, with the frame drawn around it. And yet I realize at the same time it's not really like that at all. It's completely misty and fluid.
Well, all those categories are more like finger painting than anything else. And in fact, categories or pigeonholes like 10 bhumis or 32 bhumis according to Tantra, or whatever you have, or these limitless things, are actually after conclusion, supposedly. Yeah, after conclusion, yeah. And you don't aim it for the first bhumi. And then you can't have it because you have set up your own trap for yourself. You caught up in your first bhumi. Whereas you go along from the path of unification or whatever, and then you find yourself being the first bhumi, looking back. That's always what happens in the whole this process. Is the credentials comes afterwards, and then philosophy comes afterwards. Experientially, yeah, it's always that way. Otherwise it would be too dangerous to put in categories. Even if we might talk about the whole thing by Bodhisattva, we're planning to do it, this session, it doesn't mean anything to you. And you might forget the whole thing, it's too complicated. And you might start practicing. And then some stage you begin to think, the ideas begin to pop up in your mind. That there was such thing, and maybe you are already in it. There's faint suspicion that might be true.
Well, anytime faint suspicion like that comes to me, I try to let it go as quickly as possible. Thinking that even if those are the credentials, I don't want them particularly. They would be too heavy to carry around.
Well, if you are really capabilities of carrying such a credential, it wouldn't be too heavy. But if you feel you are inadequate, maybe which is the most adequate situation of all. Trying to be a smart person, in other words, doesn't help. Yes?
One already comes to a point where instead of having any hope of ever being a bodhisattva, one sees that one acts like a rogue elephant, going around kicking right and left and so forth. How do you get out of this? And not only that, but hurting people in the process, which is very shocking to one and not being able to stop it. Is that just sort of an evolutionary process if you keep on practicing anyway, whichever way you can?
Well, the idea of hurting other people is it's very simple from their point of view. You don't have to make special allowances for the other people, so to speak. But you are the other people as well. So start on yourself and keep going.
Start with compassion on oneself.
Yeah, that's the starting point. Yeah. In other words, keep going is the motto, so to speak. Like if you're crossing a very delicate one long bridge and above turbulent river, don't look back. Keep going. Well, Well, I mean, the notion of not liking other people is also has some neurosis involved with not liking yourself at the beginning. They're all part of yourself. So some people find some people are irritated because that has certain feelings about yourself, reflection of it. So I don't think there's any problem.
In the system of thought that you described, like the stages of Bodhisattva, is there an actual slot, like for a period of time that you spend being with the teacher, like that's what you're doing, you're being with the teacher, or is that whole thing just that you need verification, so you get verification, like where you find it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have a formal relationship?
Well, you need more than formal relationship, personal relationship with the teacher. All along, particularly at the beginning stages, before you begin as Bodhisattva, whatever. And the requirements of the teacher, constantly with you or not, seem to be depends on the individuals. That in some people's case that their ambition becomes so great that the teacher have to break them down or point them out to expose the confusion or private paths that we'll be talking about. And subtly you get into the development, much subtler private paths tend to develop, and that you need a teacher to expose them, break those images down. But some other cases seem to be that distant relationship with the teacher, like, for instance, Milarepa, for instance, spent about 6 years with Mapa, entire his life, or 7 years, and then rest of life that he developed himself. So I think that's really very much individual situation. But in those cases, without teacher, the situations will bring you down your collections. So until you have to relate to a situation as a teacher, that you need some external person and a personal relationship with that person seems to be necessary. I might have to stop at this point, and the schedule is to have sitting practice, and then about 4 o'clock we have discussion, and discussions are, you can divide them among yourselves, but it is largely leaderless discussion, so it's not asking someone's ideas on it, but just work creatively by yourselves and meet yourselves. Take part in the seminar.